The Backrooms is a critically acclaimed A24 movie made by 20-year-old director Kane Parsons that has now made waves in the movie industry for how successful it has been. It's made a shocking amount of money, over $100 million in under a week, and has smashed basically every record that A24 has. I love horror movies and movies in general, so I decided to watch The Backrooms, and I have many thoughts. Welcome to What I Watch Wednesday, where I talk about different kinds of shows and movies that I've watched and my thoughts on them. For today, we're going to be talking about The Backrooms, a critically acclaimed A24 movie directed by Kane Parsons, a 20-year-old director who has now made history of being the youngest A24 director. For a quick background of anybody who isn't aware of what The Backrooms actually are, I feel like they've really blown up in recent years. They're basically a creepypasta, which was made around 2019 or 20, about this eerie liminal space that's basically an endless yellow maze. When you think about an office space that's kind of abandoned, that's exactly what The Backrooms are. Kane Parsons made a series about The Backrooms that were wildly successful, and eventually he got a deal with A24 to make a movie out of it. So the question remains, did going from a YouTube medium to the big silver screen actually work out for him? And my answer is kind of. There were definite places where I felt like the composition of the story didn't make sense. There were a lot of places where I felt like the movie had a weird pacing, and it felt like the movie was more so just chasing after tension rather than telling a cohesive story. So let's get into it. A quick plot overview of The Backrooms is that it follows Clark, who is a furniture store owner who has a lot of monetary issues. He's going through a divorce and has to live in his furniture store one night, and he notices the lights flickering on and off and goes down into the subfloor to investigate. When he stumbles down into the basement, he's into something called the backrooms. The backrooms are essentially this eerie liminal space that are reminiscent of an office space, but not quite an office space. In his own words, imagine describing a dog to somebody who's never actually seen a dog and then asking them to draw it. That's exactly the kind of feeling that you get when you step into the backrooms alongside Clark. As the story progresses, Clark gets increasingly obsessed with the idea of the backrooms. He lures in his assistant store manager, her boyfriend, even his therapist at one point, which we'll get more into soon, get lured into the backrooms. He begins trying to map out the entirety of the backrooms, but because it's essentially this endless maze, he recruits his assistant store manager and her boyfriend and accidentally get both of them severely injured or during the process. Eventually, he completely loses his mind and calls his therapist, Mary Klein, to tell her that he has officially opened the window and he will not ever be seeing her again. Mary gets very concerned given the fact that Clark has been going off the rocker ever since he essentially lost everything, and goes to his furniture store to try to investigate. Once she goes into the furniture store, she finds the backrooms. Initially, she didn't believe in the backrooms when he told her about the backrooms, and that was kind of what triggered his final lapse from reality. When she enters the backrooms, she's trapped by Clark in the backrooms. They go through this simulation exercise where she eventually tells him that it's okay to revel in the craziness of his mind if he would just let her go. Clark does come to his senses, but it's too late because his inner psyche, or at least what I think is his inner psyche, comes and unfortunately starts chasing Mary through the backrooms. We see an increasingly chaotic version of the backrooms that's kind of reminiscent of Mary's own childhood. Throughout the movie, we see bits and pieces of Mary's childhood, and we see evidence of the fact that she was raised by an incredibly paranoid and hoarder mom who never let her go outside. One of the biggest pieces of trauma that she carries around, both physically and mentally, is the destruction of her childhood home. And one of the mementos that she has is her little handprint before it was destroyed. My main problem with both Mary and Clark is that we see enough of Mary's character and Clark's character to begin to get an understanding of why they behave the way that they did throughout the movie, but we don't ever really dive deep enough into either one of their characters to fully understand their psyche. We also never see the movie fully committing to developing either character, or any character for that matter. The assistant store manager, her boyfriend, Clark, Mary, even the guy from the company that comes in to eventually rescue Mary from the backrooms, none of those characters are developed. They're just kind of dropped into the movie and referenced as needed, with bits and pieces of Clark and Mary's backstory specifically being referenced, but we never really dive further into it. Mary's character is clearly meant to be a sort of grounding presence within the story, with everybody else kind of getting sucked deeper and deeper into the backrooms. She's the one person who's just trying to get out of the backrooms. There's moments throughout her departure from reality and into the backrooms where you can see the professional psychiatrist part of her persona clash with the little girl. Jane Parsons never actually digs into that dynamic. We never really see the battle between the professional Mary and the little girl that was, in my opinion, also in a backrooms-esque home when she was growing up. Anytime the movie tries to dig into this dichotomy, it rapidly moves on. We never see her backstory fully fleshed out. And I'm not saying that we need to see the backstory fully fleshed out, but I do think that there are bits and pieces that definitely can be explored more, especially with the latter part of the movie when we dove more into her childhood home. There was a scene in the movie where we see the layers of her childhood home, and it strongly insinuates that that is the backroom itself. Now, that could be a personification of the idea that the backrooms takes the memory of whatever person is trapped in the backrooms at the moment and incorporates parts of their psyche into the backrooms themselves. But I feel like it's a little bit deeper. Mary's mother was very much so like Clark in that both characters had clearly left the realm of reality. In my opinion, I think that Mary's childhood home is another entrance into the back room. There was no exposition that covered this, and that was a major problem for me personally while watching the movie. Throughout this entire chaos of Clark and his employees as well as his therapist digging around in the back rooms, there's this weird organization called Async that used to produce MRIs but pivoted rapidly into exploring the back rooms. We never really get any sort of explanation into this company. We see one scientist dude who works for Async and is shown throughout the movie, first at the beginning when we see somebody getting eaten alive, then throughout the movie, eventually culminating into him being the person who interviews Mary after she's rescued from the back room. You get glimpses into Async the company, but there's never any story behind it. It's all left up to the viewer's imagination, which is not a bad way of telling the story. I think it's a very creative choice. There's just too much that's left unexplained. Mary and Clark are two very interesting characters. On one hand, one's a therapist and one's a client, but it feels almost like they're two sides of the same coin. We never explore that dynamic. We just get droplets of information about both characters. The backrooms themselves are functionally another character. They kind of evolve depending on who I believe is in control of the backrooms at any given moment. When we first meet the backrooms, it's very reminiscent of Clark's state of mind. There's furniture all over the place. It's very chaotic. The furniture is all kind of stuck together. And in my opinion, that's kind of reminiscent of how Clark feels like he's stuck selling furniture. But when we see Mary slowly taking over the backrooms, we see the backroom shifting. It becomes more of a hoarder house. It becomes more crumbly. Parts of the backroom start breaking down. It functionally becomes a reflection of Mary's character as opposed to Clark's character. And I felt like that shift was very well done. The thing about this movie's plot in general is that everything I'm describing to you is basically exactly what happened in the movie. I've done almost no extrapolation, and there are many questions that are left unanswered. Everything was almost aggressively vague. Questions about Async, questions about Mary, questions about Clark, questions about everything in the backrooms. All of that stuff was kind of just left in the air. All right, so now that we've covered the entire plot of the movie, let's get into the pros. The first thing that I really want to commend is that the atmosphere of the movie was amazing. Throughout the entire movie, you get this constant sense of eerie dread because you're in the backrooms and you're experiencing essentially exactly what Clark or Mary are with the same level of information. And I think that that might be why we didn't get too too much information about the backrooms or Clark and Mary's character. It was a deliberate choice to rob us essentially of all information except for the ones that the characters themselves have at the moment. The buzzing lights, the endless hallways, the weird architecture that looks almost correct but not quite. All of it set the mood and set the tone of the movie very, very well. I think the set design was done wonderfully. You can literally see the difference from when Clark was in charge of the backrooms to when Mary was in charge of the backrooms, and that was done so subtly but so wonderfully. Going along those lines, the tension building from the backrooms as well as just in real life when Mary and Clark are talking are incredibly well done. There's this one scene towards the beginning of the movie where they're like role-playing Clark and his soon-to-be ex-wife. The way that the two characters are interacting with each other, you genuinely do get this overwhelming sense of dread. Kane Parsons did an amazing job of leading the direction of the movie to get this tonality of constant tension. The climax scene of when the assistant store manager's boyfriend gets pulled down the long, eerie chute is amazing, and that is genuinely one of the only parts of the movie that I felt was actually scary. The movie is marketed as a horror movie, but I personally didn't think that it was that scary. The last thing that I think they did an amazing job on was that the central mystery of the backrooms itself, as well as the characters, is amazing. The story to me felt very incomplete, but the bits and pieces that we saw of the backrooms, of Clark's character, of Mary's character, of all of these different characters was enough to keep me intrigued and wanting more. You do want to see a sequel because there are so many unanswered questions that you want another movie and you want to explore more into this weird world. The strongest suit of this movie is that it sprinkles just enough information in to keep you invested while not giving you enough information to find out what actually is going on. So with all of the pros being stated, let's get into the con. The pacing of this movie is so strange. It's my main criticism. The beginning of the movie was just so slow. First time Clark goes into the backrooms was just too long. We could have spent that time delving further into Clark or Mary's backstory or into the company that is exploring the backrooms. Any one of those would have been better spent. I felt like there was a lot of wasted time exploring parts of the backrooms, and a lot of the tension building that was contributed during that time could have easily been spent building tension via past therapy sessions or past sessions of async members getting lost in the back room. Something else that gives us more information. Kind of along those lines of needing more information, the movie in general really lacked exposition. I want to be clear when I say this that I'm not one of those people who need to be spoon-fed information. It's just there is so little information about any of the main characters or this mysterious incorporation that for some reason switched from making MRI machines into finding this weird surreal place. It doesn't make sense. There needs to be more actual story being told. The movie as a whole does an amazing job of making you feel like you're another character just experiencing all of this. It's very much so found footage. Upon doing research is Kane Parsons' kind of strong suit, so I understand why these choices were made. I think that translating a YouTube series into a big screen would need more exposition. The lack of explanations makes some characters get lost. There's a lot of different characters, if you can even call them that are introduced throughout the movie, both in the backrooms and in real life, that you barely know anything about these characters, which makes it really hard to actually care about the character. I honestly didn't really care about Clark's character. We knew so little about him, and what we did know about him just didn't paint enough of a light to make me care about the character. I preferred Mary's character. I thought that character was a lot more interesting and had a lot more story that could be told. I was confused several times throughout the movie as to who the main character was. You can genuinely make an argument for either Clark or Mary to be the main character. My last con is kind of a culmination of everything that I've talked about so far. The movie really suffers with how short it is. I know that's a wild thing to say for a movie that's about 2 hours long, especially after I criticized the pacing of the movie, but I genuinely think that it could have been another hour longer and the movie would have been so much better for it. If we had another hour in the movie, I think that many of the questions that I had about the characters, their motivations, the backrooms in general could have been answered. Now, that leads me to question if this was done because they want to leave room for a sequel, but that to me is kind of a cheap storytelling tactic. They could have told the story a little bit better and told a more complete story while still getting a sequel, as opposed to giving us bits and pieces of information in hopes of getting a sequel, if that's why this was done. If not, I think that another half an hour even would have improved the storytelling so much. So, to round out this video, would I recommend The Backrooms? And my answer is yes. I give it a 7.5 out of 10. I think it is a solid movie. It's very well done in terms of tension building. Its storytelling can be better. In terms of what we got, it's not bad. If you're fond of found footage or kind of psychological / atmospheric horror movies, this is good. Is it a genre-defining movie? No, it's definitely not a Silence of the Lambs. For what it is, I think it is a very well done movie. It is worth watching, especially given the fact that this is Kane's first movie. It is extremely well done, and you can clearly see the talent and the vision behind it. There are some obvious issues with pacing and exposition, but overall the storytelling is so charming, it's fine. That's just my take though. Everything in this video is just done for fun and I genuinely love the movie. I think that it is a great movie and the fact that he's like 19 or 20 years old is so amazing to me. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the movie. Do you think that this movie needs a sequel? In my opinion, yes, it definitely does need a sequel. Like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Turn on the bell for notifications so that you know whenever I post. And if you ever find yourself in an empty yellow hall that has decaying carpets and water-stained walls, just leave. Trust me, it's not worth it. I will see you guys in the next video. I love you guys so much. Bye!